Let me ask you something. Have you ever made a financial decision that you knew logically made absolutely no sense, but you still did it anyway? Maybe you finally got that raise that you worked years for, and somehow you were still broke at the end of the month. But not because you were careless, you just couldn't stop the spending. Maybe you can't bring yourself to open your bank app, not because you don't care about your finances, but because you care so much that opening it makes you feel physically sick. Maybe you've built something real, a business, a career, an income that would have felt like a miracle to an earlier version of you, and you still don't feel safe for some reason. Maybe you can't charge what you're worth no matter how much evidence you have of that worth. Or you keep lending money you don't have because saying no to people you love feels more dangerous than actually going broke. Here's what I need you to hear right now. This is not a character flaw. It's simply a nervous system response. I'm Jamila McClooney, licensed fiduciary financial advisor and the founder of Black Wealth Financial, and I'm certified in the trauma of money. Today, we're going to go somewhere most financial conversations never really dare to go for whatever reason, because most of the people teaching money have never been trained to look in this area. We're not going to be talking about spreadsheets and numbers. We're going to talk about how your nervous system is completely running your financial life. And we're going to do it through 4 stories that might be the most accurate mirror that you've ever held up to your own relationship with money. Let's work. And she, on paper, she had it all. She had the career, she had the home, the credentials, the house, the life she had literally worked for her whole childhood, like that she dreamed about her. Okay. A few years ago, I had a client come to me and she, on paper, had everything. She had the career, she had the home, the luxury car, the international travel, the credentials, everything that you could think of, the life that she had literally dreamed and worked for since she was a child to build. She was actually living that life. And from the outside, she was there. She'd arrived. But she said something that she had never told anybody else. And it really made me stop and think. She said, every time I open my bank account, I feel sick. Not because the money isn't there, because I can't shake the feeling that it's all about to disappear. And since that conversation, I've had hundreds of variations of that same story. The attorney earning over $400,000 a year who still mentally calculates whether she can afford lunch. Or the business owner with money in the bank who hasn't slept through the night in years because they keep worrying and thinking about every dollar. Or the professional who checks his account 6 times a day, not to celebrate what's there, but to scan for something going wrong. And that brings me to an important point that I want you to think about. Success and safety are not the same thing, right? The financial industry has built this entire model around the assumption that they are. If you're successful, then you should be safe. Most financial advice rests on a fundamental lie, though. They tell you that if you're struggling with money, what you need to do is have a better strategy, or download this app, rebuild this spreadsheet, cut this subscription, develop more discipline. I had a client who came to me and I asked her, have you ever worked with a financial advisor before? She's like, I reached out to a financial advisor and he looked at my numbers and my situation and told me that I needed to save more and spend less. And she's like, no shit. Like, how do I do that? If I knew how to do that, I wouldn't be here talking to you. So if information alone could fix that problem, it would have been fixed already. You're not here because you need more tips. You're here because you've had the tips and something in your body just keeps overriding them and you can't figure out what that is. So when you know exactly what you should do and your body just physically won't let you do it, you're not dealing with a knowledge problem. You're dealing with a survival response. And today we're going to name it. We're going to look at it clearly. And I want to give you the one thing that financial education has withheld from you your entire life. And that's a reason to stop blaming yourself. So here's something that I want to point out. And you may or may not be familiar with it, but deep inside your body, there's a system called the autonomic nervous system. And think of it as your personal, like 24-hour security detail. So, your personal Julius, that's your autonomic nervous system. So, its only job, its entire job, is to constantly scan your environment and ask one question: are we safe right now? When we were children, the security team was taking meticulous, nonstop notes, right? It wasn't listening to what your parents said about money, it was listening to the environment around money. So it registers the tone shift in your mother's voice when that electric bill comes, or it records the heavy silence in the living room when an unexpected expense comes up. It absorbs that quiet, chronic anxiety of wondering whether there'll be enough money, enough food, enough warmth, enough heat, enough stability to make it through next month. So, if your household carried financial chaos or financial unpredictability or even chronic financial scarcity, your inner security team, your inner Julius, it didn't file that away as history. It cataloged the money itself as a threat, a live, present, ongoing threat. And here's the core problem: your nervous system doesn't know the difference between a predator attacking you through the woods, in the woods right now, and a past due notice sitting in your mailbox. It routes both of them through the same exact ancient biological plumbing system, if you will. So the same signal, same alarm, same full body response. One of the things that comes to me is, I talk a lot about my story and how my parents had a lot of money and they were business owners, and we kind of lived a privileged life at one point, and then they lost everything. And so, we would have eviction notices. And I remembered that feeling. So, growing up, fast forward to my adult life, when my pre-adult life, when I was in college, if I got a note on my dorm door, I would like freeze and I would get so afraid I wouldn't even want to open it. And it usually was just like a notice of something that was going on in the dorm or something we needed to pay attention to. But that fear that I had associated with notices on the door just overpowered me and made me stress every time I saw a notice on the door. So when you sit down as a functioning adult and you look at your finances, your logical mind thinks you're just reviewing numbers on the screen, right? Because that's what you're doing, and your brain is logical. But your nervous system sees those numbers and fires a survival sequence that has been waiting in the background for decades. So it doesn't care about your 401k. It just wants to get you through the next 5 minutes alive. And there's four specific ways that survival responses show up inside your wallet. And I want to look at each one today. So the first one is the money freeze. And that's a survival response, the freeze response. So let's look at and talk about what happens in nature for the freeze response to kind of give you a little more background and understanding of the concept. So in nature, when an animal encounters a threat that it can't outrun or overpower, it just freezes, it goes still. And its heart rate drops, its muscles lock, its mind completely detaches from the situation, and it gets completely numb. It plays dead because movement, any type of movement, means they're exposed. And then that exposure means that they could be harmed. If you've ever watched Nat Geo, it's fascinating watching animals play dead and do this in that freeze response. So if you're running a money freeze profile, then your nervous system has designated your financial reality as that overwhelming predator. What you're dealing with anytime money comes around or comes up is that overwhelming predator. So when the tax documents pile up, you don't just feel anxious, you feel nothing. A strange, like empty heaviness, a blankness, even that makes it nearly impossible to begin or to start. You just keep putting the unopened mail in the drawer. A week becomes a month. You're supposed to get all the paperwork together to file your taxes. You don't do that. A month becomes a year. You don't check your balances, not because you're irresponsible, but because something in your body knows that opening that app is going to trigger something that you don't have the capacity to hold right now. So in conversation, the freeze shows up as in an inability to engage, right? Like your partner might bring up the budget and they might want to talk about money or bills, and your mind completely goes somewhere else. Or a financial advisor starts explaining an investment and your eyes just glaze over, and you're not really disinterested. You're not being difficult. Your brain is just deliberately disconnected awareness from the financial topic, because disconnection is the only protection that it knows how to offer. And so your body's just really doing what it was programmed and made to do to keep you safe. If you recognize yourself here in this freeze, I really want you to know, like, you're not lazy, you're not careless, you're not even financially irresponsible. Your body just determined that the safest way to survive the threat of money was to go still. And that is an act of like deep protection, deep self protection. It's not a character flaw, and it's not your fault. The next one we're going to talk about is the money flight. So, this response is ultimately called the flight response. So, when the nervous system registers a threat and it determines that it has the capacity to escape, it just makes the body move, right? Fast, constantly, without stopping. Your adrenaline starts rushing, you're getting up out of there. Where it comes into play with your money and your adult financial life, running doesn't look like leaving the room and running down the street. It looks like building a life where stopping is never an option, right? You might be a super, super duper go hard. If you're a money flight response person, you're often like the highest functioning person in the room. You have multiple income streams, maybe, or you're always hustling, meticulous tracking. You're almost obsessive with the relationship of productivity and just moving forward, your accomplishments or certifications. Like, you keep going and keep going. And from the outside, you look like the gold standard of financial discipline. If anybody were to look at you, because you have this structured, meticulous life. But internally, that's where the sprint is happening. That's where the run is happening. And no matter how fast you run or how much you accumulate, the feeling of safety just never arrives. Or if it does, it never stays. Because safety is not what you're chasing. You're chasing the absence of a threat. And those are not the same thing. So the moment you stop, the moment you take a vacation or take a slow weekend or allow yourself to exhale, that's when that dread catches up to you. It's like a terror that something is going to go wrong. So, some money flight profiles also show up as spending acceleration, like the compulsive need to just get rid of money the moment it arrives. Instant upgrades, as soon as you get a bonus, as soon as you get a raise, you got to go get a new car, you got to get a new house, new apartment. Immediate like reinvestment, as soon as your money makes the money, you give it away maybe, or you relocate, because holding money in stillness feels like holding like a live wire, because it's just so unpredictable. And your body wants to pass that off as quickly as possible to keep that tension away. If this is your pattern, this money flight, you don't have a lack of gratitude and you're not being greedy. It's just a nervous system that learned early that safety only exists as long as you're moving. You're not allowed to be exhausted. You're not allowed to rest. You're not allowed to want to stop. And that survival mechanism, if you have that, it's not your fault. Let's look at the next one is the money flight. And then a money flight is just the flight response. And that one, your nervous system has experienced being cornered, right? When scarcity or financial instability felt like a direct assault, and your body prepares like weapons. It hardens, it becomes vigilant. It decides that the only way to survive is to dominate the environment before the environment dominates you. This is a really interesting one because I remember going to therapy and telling the therapist my story, and she was talking, and she's like, you seem to wear a lot of armor. And at one time you had to have that armor, but nobody told you that the war is over. So you're walking around in all this armor. And I was like, damn, like, it was just so deep thinking about that. And that's kind of what this fight response is. And so in a daily life, like your money flight profile looks like just rigid, hypervigilant control over every dollar, right? You might hoard aggressively and excessively hoard your money. You don't want to spend anything, even if those things that you can spend on are going to directly improve and impact your health or your well being, your safety. You're not having it because letting go of money feels like laying down your weapons. You got to keep that safety, that armor on, and that will be doing that in the middle of an active conflict. Your body just won't allow you to do that. So the response injects like friction into relationships, arguments with a partner or over small purchases, or instant defensiveness when money comes up in a conversation. You just have this persistent anger maybe at the financial system and capitalism that seems like they're just trying to get something from you. You're not overreacting. Your nervous system has logged decades of evidence that financial vulnerability leads to harm. And again, your brain wants to keep you safe. It's going to do everything it can to make sure that you're safe. It's not going to allow you to be vulnerable because that vulnerability was associated with maybe so much pain for you. So the fight response, it can also manifest as like financial risk taking, which is the opposite side of that. So that's the person who bets big, challenges, like takes aggressive positions in business or investments, but it's not from a place of confidence, but from a refusal to never ever again be in a position where you were powerless financially. So if you carry that anger or that rigidity, the need to control every financial inch of your life obsessively, you're not like an asshole, you're not selfish. Your body is just wearing heavy armor, similar to how I was, because it remembers exactly what happened when you weren't protected. And that defense mechanism, that's really what it is. You develop this defense mechanism. That's not your fault. Let's look at the money fawn. And this is the fourth survival profile. So it's one of those conversations that people never really talk about, but it's quietly destroying like the opportunity to build and have generational wealth, probably more than any pattern that we've discussed. The fawn is what happens when your nervous system learns that the safest way to survive is to make sure that everyone around you feels comfortable, maybe to appease or be a people pleaser or to accommodate. You take care of the emotional and financial needs of others before they ever become a problem, right? So you make yourself useful, like agreeable, generous, that no one would ever have a reason to reject you or leave you or withdraw their safety from you. And it's interesting because as I've been going through this process of being a financial advisor, this is my 16th year, I've actually seen through therapy and through the work that I've done how some of these have played in my life over time. And so I always felt and associated what I had and what I had accomplished with like my value, right? How much money I had or what I could buy. That told me like how important I was, or how I thought it made me feel important, made me feel valuable. And anytime those levels change, they severely affected like my self-view and my self-worth. So fawn is kind of like that. And if you're running a money profile off of the fawn, your bank account is just openly exposed to everybody in your life. You're the one who lends money that you don't have because if you say no, it just feels dangerous to do that, more than going without. So you overspend on gifts, maybe celebrations, dinners, not because you want to, but because you just have this deep terror that if people that you love and you feel like you let them down, that they're going to leave. And so I was always the one who just took care of the tab all the time. Like no matter where we went, no matter who's there, like I always felt like I had to pay the tab. And so those are some of the kind of things that happen when you're in that fawn. In your professional life, you might even question or lower your value, right? You might not go for that raise, or you might accept and keep staying in salaries that are below your value. You don't negotiate. You have lower rates, or you don't raise them at all if you're a business owner, because making a client or an employer uncomfortable, that feels like an active threat, and your body just can't tolerate that and handle that. So you'll systematically underprice yourself, you'll and over deliver. Like, you'll put in all the work. That's not a way for you to slack or be a slacker. You'll just do it, and you'll in order to maintain the feeling of safety that comes from that approval. That's where that value comes from, and that safety of approval. So the more that I give, the more that I do, the more that I um, put myself beneath with my finances for other people, then you feel like you have that approval and some type of value. And if you're doing it, you're bankrupting your future to just maintain a sense of belonging. Um, you've probably been praised your whole life for being so generous and so helpful and so selfless and so thoughtful. But the cost of that generosity's been invisibly extracting from you your savings, your retirement, and just overall, ultimately, your peace of mind. So if you're carrying that financial weight of everyone else at your own expense, you're not weak, you're not naive, you're not a pushover. You just learned very, very early that your safety was conditioned by your usefulness and how useful you could be. So you're sacrificing your financial future to protect your sense of belonging. And that pattern, again, is not your fault. So I bought these four profiles to you today because I work inside people's financial lives every day. I have a range of clients, from 150,000 all the way up. I've seen clients who make millions of dollars a year. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, the greatest barrier to really building real, lasting wealth and money, it's not a missed strategy, it's not an investment, it's not a lack of access to information. There's information everywhere in your phone all day long if you wanted access to it. It's not really even a lack of income. It's really, and this might be surprising to some of you, I tell my clients all the time, like, money and managing money, it has very little to do with the actual dollars and the actual money. What's really It's really about the emotions and stuff that come up under that money and why you're doing the things that you're doing with your money. Some of us are doing, stuff that we saw our parents do or didn't do with their money. But what's really keeping a lot of us from reaching those financial income potentials is shame. If you're looking at the weight of those financial patterns of avoidance or hoarding or overgiving or whatever that is that you identify with, like something is broken about who you are as a person, I really want to give you a different perspective today. If you saw yourself in freeze or fight or flight or fawn, I want you to pause before you do anything else. Like, really just pause. And I want you to take a breath. Let's just take a breath. I'm gonna take a breath. You gonna take a breath. We all gonna take a breath. So let's just take a breath. That kind of felt good. And you can take more breaths if you need to. And I want you to really think about and look at what your body has been able to do by forming those protections, maybe what you've been able to accomplish, because these are protective defensive mechanisms. And it's amazing how our body responds and does that for us to keep us safe. So it was able to keep you alive inside of environments that made money feel dangerous. It didn't fail you. Like, these things didn't fail you. They actually served you to a certain degree. And those patterns, whatever they are, every single one of them are evidence really of like an extraordinary survival system, not a broken person or broken character. And, sometimes when you are dealing with those four elements, before you actually kind of get healing in those, I don't know, I'm going to talk about me. When I was dealing with them, again, in therapy, which I'm a proponent of for everybody. Like, if you've ever been through anything, therapy has just been life altering for me. Um, but I remember my therapist asking me, like, what are some things that you're proud of? that you've done or accomplished. And I couldn't think of anything. I was just silent for a long time because I hadn't felt like that I'd achieved anything that was worthy or worth being proud of, right? Everything that I'd done and accomplished felt obligatory. This is what you're supposed to do. But she's like, you overcame all of these obstacles and abuse and all these things in your childhood, and you went to college on a scholarship, and you bought a house out of, like, she was just naming all this stuff, and I didn't feel anything about it because I was running in these patterns that just felt like these are things that I need to do to be valuable or to be worthy or to be accepted, not really seeing them for their big picture of what they really, because you can turn on the TV and see, a lot of people who have experienced some of the same things that you may have gone through financially as a kid, or and they're, on drugs or just living a real horrible life. So the fact that you're still here and surviving really says a lot from, your ability to be resilient and stand strong. So we're not even here to fix anything today. We're not here to fix anything because nothing is broken. We're not going to map out an action plan or build a recovery checklist, because the word fix, again, it implies that something's broken, and you're not broken. I wasn't broken. What I want you to carry away, though, today from this conversation is something quieter and a more powerful strategy than any of those that we could walk through and do where numbers are involved. I want you to carry awareness, that quiet, just steady knowing of why your body does what it does around money. Awareness, because that knowing, that moment of recognition of, oh, that's what's happening. That's where everything begins to shift, because then you can identify it and see it when it's happening, before it happens, while it's happening, after it happens. You're able to say, yeah, that's what it was. That's why. And you can give yourself some grace and not beat yourself up so much, because you can't punish yourself out of these situations, out of these for things, if that's what you've experienced and that's what you've been going through. You can't budget your way out of that. You can't, just ignore your way out of it. You're not alone if you've experienced or are currently experiencing any of those. There's thousands, millions of people exactly where you are right now, recognizing themselves in these situations and in these flight, fight, fawn, or freeze situations, and maybe even hearing those for the first time. So the past that you inherited around money and that money story, it's not a life sentence. I don't care how old you are today, or if you're just finding out about this, you don't have to make that your reality forever. Just be, again, we're just looking at awareness today. And I want you to be incredibly gentle with yourself today, because none of what you picked up and absorbed to survive and live and to get to where you are today is your fault. Again, I'm Jamila McClooney. Thank you so much for the courage to really sit with this. I'm sure, you may have had a lot of stories and a lot of memories pop up. I did. I had a lot of things pop up, just from my past that I've gone through and experienced talking about this. So thank you for the courage that it took to sit with this and really, really look at it. And I hope that you're able to give yourself grace and to give yourself um, a sense of awareness and peace that it's not your fault and you can stop the blame. You're not broken. There's nothing wrong.